there are four phases to retirement, one of which is called the pre-go years. And here to talk with me about that is Dana Anspach. She's the CEO and founder of Sensible Money. Dana, welcome.
Hi, Bob. As you know, I'm sort of entering my pre-go years myself, so this is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, well, I want to start first with when I first thought about doing a segment on pre-go, to me, it was always about the 5 to 10 years prior to retirement. But is that really what the pre-go years are? And I mean, this might be a term that is new to people.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking at it just from a financial planning lens, that is what we would like it to be. As a planner, I wish everyone would start getting real serious about the financial side of retirement. Ideally, 10 years out, what we typically see is about 5 years out. But as I turned 54 this year, I began thinking of retirement a little differently. And, I would say up until a year ago, the thought of retirement for me was like, nope, nope, never, nope, nope, nope. I did all my financial planning because I don't want to be a hypocrite, right? I'm gonna, do my numbers and make sure I'm in good shape. But I couldn't really connect with the idea of it. And I had an experience on a vacation that really kind of went, oh my gosh, I'm going to retire one day. And not anytime soon, but it made me emotionally connected to the process a little differently. And so now I think about it in terms of, well, it's not necessarily a timeline of 5 to 10 years out. It's kind of like, when does that moment happen? And I think that's when the pre-go years really begin, and it can happen differently for all of us, right? Mine might end up being 15, 16 years out from when I actually fully retire, but someone else's might happen the day before.
All right, so that moment for some people it comes maybe after a period of some life cycle event. I finished paying the kids' college, the house is paid for, and now I'm on to this next phase. It, or maybe it's because I've hit a date where I can increase the catch-up contributions to my 401k or my HSA, whatever it may be. Right? What is that moment for most?
Yeah, and I think those are all great examples. For some people, it might be this was the age my dad retired, or this was the age my mom retired. And so that may trigger a feeling of like, oh, I really need to get serious about planning. For some people, it could be job related, right? A shift in their work location. We've seen that a lot lately, with being required to come back to the office. Some people might say, you know what? Not going to do it anymore. And maybe they weren't really thinking about retirement. Maybe they should have been doing their planning, but that shift made them go, whoa, can this really happen for me? For others, yes, I think you're exactly right. The kids are out of the house. If they're married, maybe they're empty nesters. Maybe it's age 62 because that's suddenly when you could collect Social Security doesn't mean you should. So I think there's different triggers, and a lot of it's probably impacted by how we were raised, what we saw in our family situation, what we've seen with our coworkers. And so it was really my kind of aha of like, oh, this happens differently for every single one of us. And it's not always at the same stage of life or at the same, age. It's really kind of a moment where you really realize, oh my gosh, I'm going to retire.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking there are two moments. There's the moment when you start thinking about it seriously, whenever that may be, 5 or 10 years or however many years before retirement. And then there's the moment that you need to think about is, when do I want to retire, and what control do I have over that decision, if any?
Yeah, and yeah, because I'm so lucky, right? I own a business and I believe I will have the option to wind down. And I am not at all wound down right now. And so I'm full force. And so for me, I've realized wind down means, Dana, when there's a holiday, you don't work. That is phase one of my entree into retirement. But I can see that in my mid 60s, would I be able to structure my workload so I'm 4 days a week and then eventually 3 days a week? And, that my full time retirement may occur by around age 70. That's the kind of plan I think is going to best suit me. And I also see that a lot for people in the medical profession. I just have someone who, in his late 60s, he had fully retired for a year and then just chose to go back at 67 days a year, which is really part time. But I asked why, right? Financially, it wasn't needed. And his answer was, I enjoy my free time more if I still have this professional engagement piece of my life. And I've realized I want to stay professionally engaged as long as I can until my knowledge becomes outdated, is his answer. And I think there's a group of us, financial planners, accountants. I don't see it
Lawyers.
so much with attorneys, but I see it a lot in the finance and medical professions where we will have that option. But then there's a whole group, often the clients we serve in corporate America. And it's like, I call it the hard stop. Work, work, work. One day you're retired. And that can be a big, jarring experience for lots of reasons that if we have time, we might get into. And it's a completely different experience. And I think sometimes those are the ones where when I said it could happen in a day, right? It may have been, no, I'm happy, I'm happy. And then, you know, requirements change, a company gets sold, new manager comes in, and one day they're just like, boom, I'm done. And so there's a lot of, jarring kind of uncertainty or big adjustments that can come with that experience. And then I think there's a group that have what I'll call a forced retirement. And my understanding from the research I've read is retirement can be the most jarring experience for them. They had planned to work longer. They felt like everything was fine, but maybe their industry changed. Maybe they went through a layoff. Maybe they experienced a health condition or a family member did, and they were forced to leave and, deal with this situation. And it wasn't on their terms. And when it's not on your terms, you can go through some resentment and some, just bitterness and some things you really need to work through to move into a happy phase of retirement.
Yeah. When you think about this notion of people who don't get to choose their date of retirement, you mentioned it. Some of the research I've read says people plan on working to 65, but more often than not, those people end up retiring at 62. So there's a 3 year period where they have to either find another job or see if their savings will cover that 3 years and then some, right? Instead of 30 years of retirement, it's now 33 or 35 years of retirement. And maybe they didn't plan, they planned on saving those additional 3 years in their 401k. And now they either have to reduce their lifestyle or invest more. I don't know invest more aggressively, all that stuff, right? Like they have decisions to make.
Hopefully not, but there's some risks that come with that. But yeah, they have to do something differently, right? Yeah. And I think the value of planning farther out, and this is where I just feel so grateful. I don't think I would be a good planner of my own finances if I didn't do this for a living. I've probably said that on these videos before. But because I am adamant to not be a hypocrite, I've been really good and do my planning. And so even though I wasn't emotionally connected to the idea, but if people can do that, then what happens, and I've had this experience with so many clients, when a sudden event happens, it's much easier to recalibrate and to say, okay, you have a non-emotional partner with you, helping you explore some of the solutions, and here's what you can do. And I think that is critical. The financial side of it is critical to go through that transition and with as less stress as possible. But it's the emotional side that is also critical, is to really, like, if you're going to be happy and you have a lot of years remaining and you want them to be enjoyable, you may have some bitterness and some kind of stuck in there that you need to work through. And, helping people realize that part is just as important. And it's okay if you feel that way, or it's okay if you worked in corporate America and you had a hard stop and all of a sudden you're thinking retirement's supposed to be rah, 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 rah. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do with all my time? Like, this isn't how I thought it would feel.
Yeah. It's interesting. There was a recent Financial Planning Association survey that was produced that said many financial planners think their clients are financially prepared for retirement, but not emotionally prepared. And I know that notion of being emotionally prepared is something that Fritz Gilbert of the Retirement Manifesto has often said is like job one, in addition to job two being financially ready. And maybe you could talk a little bit about like the steps one can take to become emotionally ready, and maybe also your new venture.
Yes, well, thank you for bringing that up. Fritz Gilbert, for those listening who may not know, is the founder and author of a blog called the Retirement Manifesto. And many years ago, he began following my work and read one of my books, and I began following his work and had written an article about top 10 retirement blogs, and his was on it. And so we became friends over the years, and he has journaled on his blog his own journey through retirement. So he falls, I believe, in the like hard stop category. But he planned with his wife so thoughtfully his journey and shared it transparently for all of us to read and follow along. And so he went from work, work, work to stop one day. And then he gave himself and his wife this time to explore, to just what lights us up. Let's just commit to nothing, but say yes to everything. And I think for those who go through a hard stop, that is so important, right? To have that time of just exploring. And through that, they were able to find some new passions and things that if they had tried to make a list before they retired, those things wouldn't have showed up. And in addition, when you're working full time, we can talk all we want about your new identity and purpose and, what lights you up, but you don't have time to figure that out. So if you're going to end up in a hard stop, you have to give yourself that time to explore. And so that's really what I've learned from reading Fritz's blog. And then I read he's entering the second phase, what I might call the beginning of the slow go phase or the end of the go phase of retirement, where he felt like he was going to wind his blog down or begin writing less. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm just entering the phase he was at when he started this blog. Maybe I could pick up where he left off and journal my own thoughts from a different perspective, from someone who's not going down the hard stop path, but for someone who's going through the wind down path and who will have to navigate all of these things of how to work less and which things do I still work on and, what do I do with my time and be able to share that. So I'm very excited to be able to join him on his blog and I will be sharing my own journey there too.
Yeah, well, we all look forward to reading that, and we've all been helped by Fritz and his work. It's been inspirational to me, I know, for one. So
It
that's going to be
has.
great. So the other thing, when I think about Prego, I mean, we're going to do another episode on Prego. Maybe we'll talk about the hard stuff, the assets, the liabilities, the income and the expenses, all that stuff that you need to get in order. But one of the things um, I'm fond of talking about, as you know, is the risks that you'll face in retirement and the time to address those risks and manage and mitigate them. I think would be in the pre-go years. I'm curious if you agree or not.
And I think what can be hard is if you haven't had that kind of awakening yet, you may not be aware of how important it is to do that planning. But, if you do the planning, even though you think you might not retire until somewhere down the road, you're going to be in a much better situation. And there are definite risks. One of the key ones I've seen, and I remember a client that someone else in my firm served years ago. He was in the tech industry and he handled it so well. He was in some of his highest earning years and still relatively young. And a lot of people like that are, spending and traveling or maybe, upgrading their home or doing some things. But he was like, my industry is, so volatile and I know how fast technology can change and my skill set could become obsolete. And so he really focused on maximizes his savings during that pre-go time when his earnings were peaked. And it was so smart because, when his industry shifted, he was well prepared to navigate that change. So that's one of the things that we could all keep in mind is like, we may not be able to work till 65, or I may not be able to work till 70, even though I think I can. So how do I make sure I'm prepared if a health event, or depending on your industry, an industry shift comes along? Another I know you and I just talked about was we had listened to a presentation on property and casualty insurance. They had all those fires out in California recently. Um, all these stories of people who thought their insurance coverage was sufficient, and the realization that at this phase of life, maybe you got to look at insurance differently. You know, we're younger and most people are good savers if they're following this kind of content. And we want like, I want to pay the least premium possible, right?
Yeah.
Like, I will shop my insurance and, I saved $100, by switching. And, um, instead it was like, well, what covers the most catastrophic risks? Once you're near retirement, if you have a higher deductible, that's probably not going to derail your retirement, right? So, okay, I had to pay an extra $500 or $1,000, for my deductible. That's not going to mean I had to work an extra 5 years. But if you had a catastrophic, like, oh my gosh, my house went through a hailstorm was an example that was used, or the fires that we've seen recently, and it cost $700,000 more out of pocket than what my insurance coverage because just of the way the structure of the insurance. Well, a $700,000 catastrophic event can certainly derail your retirement plans. So that kind of risk management, I had never really thought about it in terms of like, oh, you may want higher deductibles, but better and full coverage on any true catastrophic type events. And they don't happen that often. Hopefully they never happen to you. But if they do, you would never see it coming and your plans are, changing for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. You and I have been going through the RMA program where we talk about risk management and this notion of low probability of something happening, but severe consequences does require insurance. And, it's not a topic that everyone loves talking about, right? But
Yeah.
insurance is a necessary evil of retirement planning, I think.
Yeah, and it's, gosh, maybe we need to change our language around it, right? Like maybe it's you know, a appropriate risk management tool. I know that sounds too insurancy, but I got to think of a new catchphrase for it, right? Like it's your safety net. It's I
Yeah.
don't know, but
Yeah. Don't
I
put your,
don't sell insurance. I hope all the listeners know that. I have no incentive. I just it would be devastating to see someone save and do everything right and get on the cusp of retirement and have an event like that set them back so far, because they were all focused on minimizing premiums and not really looking at the value of their home and its contents and what it would cost to replace it and making sure it could be replaced at the same quality that they had if they had added any, custom work in their home or higher end things. Like just those are factors that hadn't really crossed my mind before. I thought it was a great, great insight.
yeah. So I'm of two minds. I had an old boss who used to say, "Don't think about hypotheticals, just think about what's real." But I also think about as you're talking, I'm thinking about like I do need to think about all the things that could go wrong, right? Like and maybe I don't have to insure against all the things that could go wrong, but nonetheless, I feel like I ought to at least do justice to my plan to think about those things. And I think about the Society of Actuaries has 15 risks that I need to think about, and others have 20 risks. And nonetheless, there are tools and techniques out there to help you at least think about these things.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it can be so confusing for people, right? Because it's like, well, should I do this to hedge this risk? Should I put all my money in money market or bonds because, what if a big market crash happens? Or, oh, if stocks and real estate are the best way to hedge against inflation, would I put all my money there? Well, you don't put all your eggs toward hedging one risk. And so I think the challenge can be when you look at all these risks, there's different decisions that help minimize the impact of some of these catastrophic risks. And so planning helps like a puzzle piece say, well, each piece, is there for a reason. And it helps reduce the impact of this risk. And this piece helps reduce the impact of that risk, you don't find ever one piece that does it all. And so you have to be aware of that and really think about it. Kind of, you're stepping back going, okay, when I get all these pieces together, what is the picture I have? And that picture should be something that is less risky because of the way I put the pieces together.
So when you think about the pre-go phase, in my mind, I'm thinking there's like, okay, there's the date of retirement that I have in mind, and then there might be that's the probable case, and then the best case is something else, and the worst case is X. I mean, do you want people to have a range of possibilities as opposed to being fixated on something?
I think that's smart. I can tell you as planners, what we'll often do is have, the person's intended retirement date, but then we may structure the portfolio as if they ended up retiring, 3 to 5 years earlier than that. And we discuss it. Obviously, we don't do it without talking to them, you know.
Surprise.
But we have this kind of discussion that says, I know you think you're going to work till X, but the more conservative way to approach this is, let's structure your portfolio. So if instead retirement happened 3 or 5 years earlier, we're ready. And if you had a sudden retirement where, forced almost, wasn't planned, and the market was down at the same time, and keep in mind, those events may have a higher likelihood of occurring simultaneously. If we're in a big economic distress time, we're probably going to have more layoffs. And so, that can be the true kind of event that if you've planned ahead, you come through it relatively unscathed and, you go, okay, we can do this. We're going to be okay. Versus if you just said blinders on, nope, nope, I know I'll be able to work till 65. And I get there are some professions and jobs that feel very secure. Maybe somebody thinks but we just don't know, right? We don't know that we're actually going to be able to do what we think we'll be able to do.
Yeah. So I don't want to make this sound joyless, right? Which is, I have my day job, and now you're asking me to do all this other work to prepare for the time when I don't have my
Oh,
day job. But I mean, there would be joy in doing it and knowing that you have peace of mind, I guess.
yeah, I would say, like, for many people, there actually is joy in engaging in the planning, right? There is. There's people like us, and we love it, and that's why we do it for a living. And there's people who have different professions, but truly love doing their own planning. They do find joy is, enjoyment from doing it. And there's people that hate it. And so I think it's knowing if you're one of the people that really doesn't enjoy it, find a financial planner who does, and if you don't want to know the details, find someone you trust and just, you can give very big picture instructions like, look, I don't want you to use all that lingo with me. I just need to know I'm in good shape. And a lot of times those are the kind of conversations. It's like, it might say like, okay, here's what we did at a really high level. You ask me, how much detail do you want to have? And they, some people want none, like none. And others like to get into the weeds, but you know, just like I kind of put off engaging in the emotional connection to planning because I just wasn't there yet. Um, my realization was how important both sides are. I think if you're someone who, is putting off engaging in the financial side of planning, well, that is important too. And the two work together. They have to work together to have the best experience. And it's not as scary as you think. And you do feel, as you said, more secure. Um, I don't know if people feel joy. Some of them do, but definitely peace of mind after really thoroughly understanding their finances.
Yeah. I think that's as good a place as any to leave this discussion. We have more to talk about with pre-go. And then we also will be talking about we didn't really mention that you're writing a book about these four phases.
I am, and that's why this is on my mind. I'm writing a book called Living Off Your Acorns, Your Guide to the Four Phases of Retirement, where we'll talk about this pre-go phase and then the go-go phase. And my two phases will overlap when I think about my own planning. And then the slow go phase that, begins, maybe when we encounter some health and mobility restrictions. And then the no-go phase, which can end up being the last few years of life. And so I have talked to some of our 89-year-old clients as I'm, writing this content, really understanding what those later phases feel like. And it's just been an amazing journey. And I'm very excited to share their stories.